What is the dilemma of magnitude?
Magnitude means significance, substance. Is it significant to an audience? You tend to want to have a good, strong dilemma for your protagonist, but the dilemma can be weak. It may not pass what they call the so what test. Sam Cohn, the founder of Columbia Pictures, used to run his development process like this. He would bring his writers into a conference room around a big long table, and he'd put his head down on the end of the table and go, okay, what do you got? And the guy would pitch his idea. He'd be go, so what? Next, blah, 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 so what? And he'd go around the table, and finally somebody would be like, ah, yeah, that's got something. That, let's work on that. So it's that kind of thing. It's like, it has to pass the so what test. You've probably seen movies where you're watching it and it gets going and you're like, wait, is that all this is? Come on. You know, it's like, or they're telling you a story and you can tell that they want you to feel X, Y, and Z about your main character, but you don't. And you're like, I just don't care. That's called trying to dictate an emotional response. It's like, I'm saying, you have to feel this way about this character because I say so. And you're like, I hate this person. You know, it's like, I'm not invested in them. And that has a lot to do with like magnitude, because if you are focusing on the specific aspect of a good, strong dilemma for your protagonist, it really has to be strong. It has to be significant. It has to be of substance to the audience so that they're really drawn into it. And that goes hand in glove with universality too, because they say that the deeper you go, the more universal your story becomes. So that you could be writing a story about, you know, a goat's herd in Ethiopia, and if you've got a really deep, compelling dilemma, then a banker in Tokyo could be like, I'm caught in the same thing. And a fisherman in Alaska could be like, I'm living that exact same dilemma of like honor versus duty, or so, you know what? It's like, if the average person in the audience, if it hits the average person in the audience where they live, then they'll connect to it. And because if they don't care about it, then you've got nothing, because it's all about the audience. Whatever you're building into your story has to connect to the audience and get them up on the edge of their seat and keep them there. So there's a number of different ways in which you have to get the audience sympathy for the protagonist and maintain it. If the protagonist makes a bad choice or whatever, then the audience can be like, I'm not rooting for that person anymore. I don't like that. I'm done. Like, I don't care anymore. So you have to get it and keep it. And so magnitude is just one aspect of that. And it's like I was talking about, the tools create certain distinctions, and you want to utilize those distinctions as clearly as possible, because that's where you get the power of the tools. And magnitude of a dilemma is one of those distinctions. What you don't want to do is muddy those distinctions every time they become inconvenient, because then you lose the power of the tool.
How does a writer know they have a good, strong dilemma?
Well, so much of that comes with experience with the tool and knowing how to use it fully and properly. You know, it's like you see that in a doctor, where their ability to diagnose something that's tricky has a lot to do with their training and their experience. And their training often creates instincts in them where, you know, maybe the professor in medical school kept saying, never forget this. You know, you may never see it in your whole career, but always look for it. And so even if the doctor doesn't even remember that consciously, part of their brain is like going, did I check that box? And if they actually do, then they're like, wait, does it hurt when you sit up in the morning? And they're like, yeah, What does that have to do? My head hurts. Like, no, no, no. Okay, we got to get you into surgery right away. You know, like they don't even know where that came from, but they're like, their training is built into their subconscious at a certain level. So there's a, you know, it depends on your experience with the tool and all that. But, you know, that's a distinction between a deeply trained writer and one who is solidifying their craft. You know, even as you're solidifying your craft, that's a key thing to look for, is the strength of your protagonist's dilemma. Because it's so central, it's part of the foundation of your story. So that, you know, if you're building a skyscraper and the foundation has been poured, you know, you may get an engineer and go around and double check to make sure that the concrete's set up as hard as it was supposed to, so you don't have weak areas in your foundation, or that the substructure beneath the foundation isn't weak or might collapse in a heavy rain. You really want to make sure that the basic stuff you're going to build on is really solid, because everything else that comes after that is impacted if there's a weakness in the first principles and the core things. One of my friends is a martial arts teacher, and he said that by being a martial arts teacher for so long, he had to keep focusing on first principles, because that's what he was teaching a lot of the times, just the most basic stuff. But he said after a while, he realized that it was making him a much more substantial martial artist, because the first principles are what everything else is built on, and that solidified his foundation. And I found that that was true too. He said they're first principles for a reason. They're the main underlying components that everything else comes from. So for instance, I taught nonstop for 18 years in these small groups. There were 6 people maximum, and I was working with each person on their own script. So like if I explained dilemma, then I would go around the room and I might start with you and say, okay, what's your story idea? And I explained dilemma. I showed how it worked on Godfather, Tootsie, Blade Runner, things like that. And then you tell me your story idea that you brought, and I've never heard it before. So you may have, you know, some completely wacko comedy that I'm like, wait, let me get some coffee so I can sharpen my brain here. I have to like wrap my brain around it and then look at it. I was like, okay, is there a dilemma in the story? And if there is, I can see one half of it very clearly. I can feel the other half, but I can't put my finger on it. And after a while, it's like, oh, right, it's that. Oh, that's funny. Yeah, you got a comedy with a dilemma that's funny. That's what you want. Like, that's clever. And you may be saying, I didn't know that was in there. I'm like, yeah, but that's my skill with the tool enabled me to find it. And you're like, wow, yeah, I love that. I didn't know that I had that in there. I was like, well, it was there, you know, but I have substantial expertise in this skill. It took me a bit to kind of feel around in the mud and be like, oh, wow, look at that. You know, so it's like skill and familiarity with it. But in terms of a student knowing if they have a good, strong dilemma, part of it is experience, and part of it is just rigorous technique, trying to use the tool explicitly and to utilize all its distinctions very clearly, because the distinctions are there for a reason and have great power. And dramatic writing is generally considered the most elusive of all the literary disciplines. It's tricky, it's slippery, it's hard to pin down. A script can work 3/4 of the way through and then fall apart, and nobody knows why it fell apart, and nobody can make it work. Or a script can look great on paper, have all the top people, all the money in the world, and it goes out and loses $100 million on its opening weekend. And the same basic story shot for $62,000 in a shoebox and, with 2 actors goes on to win Best Picture and, make $100 million. And they're like, it's the same story. And we had all the top people in everything. And they looked the same on paper, but theirs worked. And I don't know why theirs worked, and I don't know why ours didn't. It's slippery. And so the ability to use the tools as rigorously and explicitly as possible helps you to grab onto this slippery thing that keeps spinning under your touch. And it's like, I can't even pin it down to use the tool. The more you can use those distinctions in the tool, kind of like dragon talons, where you can grab this slippery marble and make it actually stop in place and really do serious surgery on it. And okay, now that may fix it because it had this wobble and nothing we did made it work, but I was able to really pin it down to get down to real specifics with it. And all of a sudden, that part of it, seems to work better. And yeah, it helps the whole thing. So part of it is just pure technique. And part of it is just pure intuition with storytelling skills and seat of the pants, making stuff up. And it's like mud wrestling. It's like you're down in the mud. You can't even see half the stuff. And you're like, I can't even get these two to click together. It's not easy to make a script work. And that's why I keep saying you got to have huge chops as a storyteller, and you got to have serious craft as a dramatist. And you got to really be able to synthesize those two together. And the better you get at that, the more your scripts will tend to work. It's about being consistent. A number of writers have a great first script and it's a big hit and they're the toast of the town and everybody's hiring them, and they can't make their second script work. And they don't know why their first script worked, and they don't know why the second one isn't working. And, being able to be consistent is really important. And so it's a tricky business. It's not easy. And you want to really have big muscles in every department. Storytelling, craft as a dramatist, character development, all this stuff, you got to really be hitting on all cylinders to have a consistent career.